Imagine, if you will, just waking up tomorrow morning in your own bed.
Right. Just a totally normal morning.
Exactly. The
You know,
sunlight is streaming through the curtains just the way it always does. Your alarm clock is blinking the right time, and, maybe the smell of coffee is wafting in from the kitchen.
sounds pretty ideal, honestly.
It does. And your family is bustling about, just murmuring in those familiar, comforting tones. Everything feels completely normal.
Okay, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Well, here it is. You happen to glance out the window, and you realize that the world you knew, like the entire society you spent your life navigating, has completely vanished overnight.
Oh, wow. Just gone.
Completely gone. But the truly terrifying part, your family knows.
Wait, they know it's gone.
Yeah, they know it's gone. And they are desperately, frantically trying to build a fake, cardboard cutout version of your old life right there in your bedroom.
Just to keep you comfortable.
Exactly. Just to keep you from experiencing the shock of reality. So the question is, how long before the cracks in that illusion start to show?
And, I mean, when they do, would you even want to know the truth?
That is the big question.
Because the authors of the cultural broadcast we are analyzing today, they would argue that those cracks are actually already showing everywhere.
Right.
And that most of us are actively choosing to ignore them. I mean, we're hardwired to seek the familiar, but they pose this deeply unsettling question.
Which is?
What happens when our psychological safety requires us to completely detach from reality?
Yeah. And that is the core philosophical problem presented in this really fascinating Dutch summer broadcast series we're diving into today. It's called Cultural Treasure Digging.
Right, and it's a very specific perspective.
It is. Just to set the stage for you listening, we are looking at a deeply critical, right-leaning perspective that views modern Western society as basically a series of meticulously constructed illusions.
Yeah, and it's important to remember as we go through this, we are unpacking how these commentators construct their arguments. We're looking at their perspective.
Exactly. We're just the guides on this deep dive. But what they do is they take three classic works of art and use them as scalpels to dissect modern politics.
They're looking at the contemporary world, specifically, modern liberal politics, left-wing social movements, climate activism, asylum policies, and they are seeing a matrix of control.
And their methodology is honestly what makes this so worthy of analysis.
It really is. By mapping these highly specific, politically charged contemporary anxieties onto mid-century cinema and theology, they're attempting to reveal the architecture of modern societal power.
Yeah, they are trying to show how a bureaucratic state operates.
Yeah.
And not through overt violence, but through psychological manipulation and linguistic control.
Which is a terrifying concept.
It really is. So let's start with where they anchor this entire thesis. They begin by looking at the institutional illusion.
Right, using the 1975 film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Which, I mean, most people know the broad strokes, right? Jack Nicholson is Randall McMurphy, rebelling against the suffocating authority of a psychiatric ward.
Yeah, the classic rebel story. But the broadcast focuses heavily on the author of the original book, Ken Kesey.
And they focus on Kesey because of his lived experience, right?
Exactly. The commentators argue that Cuckoo's Nest is not merely an allegory. They claim it is practically a whistleblower's account.
Wow, a whistleblower's account.
Yeah, because before writing the novel, Kesey didn't just observe a psychiatric ward. He actually worked in one as a night orderly at the Veterans Hospital in Menlo Park, California.
But the layer beneath that, which the broadcast finds crucial, is his involvement in the CIA's M-Culture program.
Which sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's historical fact.
Wait, I need to understand this. The M-Culture mind control program. How did a novelist get tied up in a covert CIA operation?
Well, it was the early 1960s, and the government was running these clandestine experiments on the effects of psychoactive drugs.
It was specifically LSD, right?
LSD. And they wanted to see if these drugs could be used for psychological torture, interrogation, or, actual mind control.
And Kesey was involved in this.
He volunteered as a test subject while he was working at the hospital. He was actually paid to take these hallucinogens and report on his experiences.
That is wild.
It is. And through this, he gained a front row seat to the dark underbelly of institutional control. I mean, he learned about the realities of forced lobotomies.
Oh.
Yeah, electroshock therapy, and just the absolute soul-crushing routine of clinical institutionalization.
So he is essentially watching an institution actively try to break down and reprogram the human mind.
Precisely the point the broadcast is making. Kesey saw how medical authority could be totally weaponized to strip away individualism.
Now, I know the broadcast notes that Kesey actually despised the 1975 film adaptation.
He did. He hated it because it shifted the narrative perspective away from the marginalized patients like Chief, the deaf-mute Native American character.
Right, and it focused on the loud, rebellious McMurphy instead.
Exactly. But the source argues that the film still perfectly captured that oppressive atmosphere.
Which makes sense because director Milos Forman shot it in a real working psychiatric clinic in Oregon.
He did. And I recall reading that they used actual patients as extras in the background.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it creates this incredibly blurry line between fiction and documentary. The psychological toll on the set was reportedly immense because the environment was just so authentic.
I can't even imagine. And Danny DeVito was in it too, right?
He was. He played Martini. But the broadcast zeroes in on one specific element of that environment above all else.
Let me guess. Nurse Ratched.
Exactly. The character of Nurse Ratched, played by Louise Fletcher.
She is just the ultimate cold-blooded antagonist, but she doesn't carry a weapon.
No, not at all.
She just has this blank, unyielding stare.
Yeah.
I heard she was so convincing with that order-following stare that she basically couldn't get cast in comedies afterward.
I wouldn't doubt it. The commentators in our source elevate Nurse Ratched from just a cinematic villain to a symbol of the modern state itself.
Okay, how so?
Their phrase for her methodology is cold, calculating empathy. This is a crucial concept in their critique.
Cold, calculating empathy. That's an oxymoron.
It is, but in their view, totalitarianism no longer arrives wearing military boots and shouting orders.
Right, it doesn't look like a dictator.
No, it arrives in a crisp white uniform, speaking in a very calm, soothing voice, insisting that everything it is doing is just for your own safety and well-being.
I want to push back on that a little, or at least explore the mechanics of it for a second. How does cold empathy actually trap someone?
That's a good question.
Because if someone is being nice to you, even if it's fake, how does that equate to authoritarian control?
Well, look at how the broadcast analyzes the famous medication scene to answer that. So McMurphy is at the counter, and Ratched hands him his daily pill.
Okay.
And McMurphy challenges her. He demands to know what the medication actually is.
Right. He doesn't just want to blindly swallow something an authority figure hands him. He wants some autonomy.
Exactly. And how does Ratched respond? She doesn't scream at him.
Right.
She doesn't call the orderlies to hold him down and force it down his throat.
Which is what you'd expect in a classic prison movie.
Right. Instead, she delivers a heavily veiled, passive-aggressive threat hidden completely behind clinical procedure.
Wait, what does she say?
She implies that if he doesn't take the pill orally, they will just have to find another way to administer it.
Oh, wow. So she's threatening him with a needle or something worse.
Yes, but she never explicitly states the violence. The threat of physical force is entirely cloaked in bureaucratic necessity.
It's just protocol, Mr. McMurphy.
Exactly. And the broadcast sees this as the ultimate metaphor for modern governance. The commentators argue that the state offers you a directive.
Like a mandate or a regulation or a societal norm.
Yes, and frames it as medicine. If you question it, the state doesn't overtly attack you. It simply points to the bureaucratic consequences of non-compliance.
All while maintaining a veneer of benevolent concern.
Exactly.
It's like, we just want what's best for the community, and if you don't comply, well, the system has procedures for people who disrupt the community.
It's incredibly manipulative because it robs you of the ability to fight back. I mean, you can't punch a procedure.
You really can't. And the broadcast maps this directly onto how modern democracy functions.
They do. They use the World Series voting scene in the film to illustrate this.
Oh, that scene is heartbreaking.
It really is. So McMurphy wants to watch the baseball game, which requires changing the ward's rigid television schedule.
Right. And Nurse Ratched, feigning democratic fairness, offers to put it to a vote.
Yes. So McMurphy goes around the room trying to wake up these heavily medicated men, trying to rally them to actually care about something.
And in this triumphant, deeply moving moment, he gets the massive Native American patient, Chief Brompton, to slowly raise his hand.
Right.
It's exactly the number of votes McMurphy needs. He gets the majority, he wins.
But the broadcast focuses entirely on Ratched's reaction to that win.
What'd she do?
Faced with a democratic outcome she disapproves of, she calmly looks at the raised hand and states that the voting period had already closed.
She just nullifies it.
She says the meeting had technically ended moments before, therefore the deciding vote doesn't count, and the schedule remains unchanged.
Wait, I'm trying to picture the mechanics of this in real life. It's basically like playing a board game where your opponent owns the board the pieces and the rule book.
That is a great analogy.
You strategize, you play perfectly, you are literally one move away from winning according to their stated rules, and they suddenly flip to a back page and say, oh, I forgot to mention Clause 4B, which says you actually lose.
That is the exact point the broadcast is making. The commentators call this moving the goalposts, and they explicitly link it to modern Dutch politics.
How so?
They reference specific politicians like Hugo de Jong and Peter Onsick to argue that the contemporary political system merely plays democracy.
They think it's a sham?
They call it a pantomime. According to the source, the rules of the game are continuously bent or selectively enforced to ensure that the establishment, the Nurse Ratcheds of the world, always achieve their predetermined outcome.
All while giving the citizenry the comforting illusion that they participated in the process. But, okay, if the system is that rigged and the control is that absolute, why don't people just leave?
What do you mean?
Well, in the movie, they are literally locked inside a hospital ward. They can't leave. So how does that apply to us?
See, that is where the source delivers its most devastating observation about the film.
Oh.
They point out the tragic revelation later in the story. They aren't locked in, or at least the vast majority of them aren't.
Wait, really?
Yes. Most of the men in that ward, including young, terrified patients like Billy, are there voluntarily.
His mother dumped him there, right?
Right, but they are not committed by the state. They could pack their bags and walk out the front door on any given Tuesday.
Oh, wow. That completely flips the metaphor. Because if the patients are there voluntarily, then the broadcast is arguing that modern society is an open asylum.
That is exactly what they argue. The claim is that we are voluntarily institutionalizing ourselves.
So no physical barricade is keeping us compliant.
No. Instead, the psychological conditioning is so profound, the fear of the outside world has been so thoroughly ingrained in us, that we choose the suffocating safety of the ward over the chaotic freedom of reality.
And how do they claim we are being conditioned in the real world?
The commentators argue that we take our pills voluntarily, both literally and metaphorically.
What does a metaphorical pill look like?
They frame things like official dietary guidelines, vaccine rollouts, and mainstream media programming as a daily regimen designed to sedate the population.
Okay, so you wake up, you consume the state-approved media narrative, you follow the health directives without question.
Right. You take your metaphorical pill and you willingly remain in your assigned bed.
I see where they're going, but how do they account for the fact that people actually argue and debate in modern society?
What do you mean?
Well, we aren't all just sitting quietly in a circle. There's immense friction in politics today. People are angry.
The broadcast actually addresses that by looking at the group therapy sessions in Cuckoo's nest.
The ones Ratched leads.
Yes. Ratched doesn't keep the men quiet. She actively encourages them to talk.
Right, she wants to share.
But she manages the discourse by weaponizing shame. She constantly brings up Billy's mother, asking, what would your mother think?
Oh, that's brutal.
It is. She uses deep-seated guilt to tear the men down and turn them against one another.
So she gets them to police each other. The institution doesn't even have to do the heavy lifting.
Exactly. And the broadcast argues that modern society uses the exact same tactic of manufactured shame to divide the populace today.
How does that play out, according to them?
They point out that expressing right-wing political views or simply questioning prevailing asylum policies is swiftly framed by mainstream culture as fascist or morally reprehensible.
Okay, so the label itself is the weapon.
Right. They argue this is not a genuine intellectual debate. According to the source, it is a clinical shaming tactic designed to force compliance.
So the goal is to make the individual feel so ostracized, so practically radioactive, that they willingly fall back into line with the institutional consensus just to alleviate the social pressure.
Exactly. It is societal group therapy, moderated by the establishment.
Okay, so if the system is this pervasive, if it controls the rules of democracy and the psychological shame of the populace, what is the solution?
Wow.
Because you'd think a commentary like this would champion McMurphy. I mean, he's the guy who throws a water fountain through a window, steals a bus, and fights the nurse. He should be their absolute hero.
You would think so. But surprisingly, the broadcast argues that McMurphy's approach is a catastrophic mistake.
Really? Fighting back is a mistake.
They argue that fighting a bureaucratic, passive-aggressive system with loud, brute force rebellion is exactly what the system wants you to do.
Why? Wouldn't loud rebellion wake other people up?
To explain this, the commentators use a really vivid metaphor, a fly attacking a spider.
Okay, track with me here.
When the fly hits the web, The silk feels soft at first. It doesn't feel like steel bars.
All right, it's just a little sticky.
But the fly panics, it thrashes, it buzzes loudly, and the spider simply waits.
The spider doesn't even have to fight.
Exactly. The spider patiently wraps the fly layer by layer, using the fly's own frantic energy against it until it is completely immobilized.
Oh, wow. So the source argues that McMurphy's loud defiance simply gave Ratched the justification she needed to systematically wrap him in bureaucratic procedure.
Until she literally had him lobotomized.
That is dark. So if you scream at the establishment, they just label you a dangerous radical, wrap you in legal or social consequences, and basically erase you.
That's their argument.
Then what is the alternative? Just giving up?
Not at all. Their prescribed solution is to maintain what they call raw masculine vitality and a healthy allergy to the system.
An allergy.
Yeah, an allergy implies an automatic biological rejection. You don't debate the system. Your body simply refuses to assimilate it.
And how do you practically do that?
A massive part of this silent resistance involves linguistic discipline.
Linguistic discipline, like refusing to say certain words.
Exactly. The source argues you must vehemently refuse to use the language of the state. They give a very specific example, actually advising listeners to reject terms like people of color.
Wait, I'm trying to map their logic here.
Yeah.
Because isn't that just considered polite, contemporary terminology? How is using a polite phrase a capitulation to a dictatorship?
In the broadcast's framework, adopting the terminology of the institution means you have accepted their underlying premises.
Because language frames reality.
Exactly. If you use their words, you're playing their game on their board, and you are already caught in the web.
So they advocate for being a silent strategic force. You don't yell at the nurse. You quietly observe the architecture of the ward and figure out how to dismantle the locks.
That's it. In fact, they refer to modern society as a lobotomized society, which is a brutal callback to Kesey.
It really is.
And the visual they use for this is fascinating. They talk about people wearing helmets on bicycles.
Wait, bicycle helmets.
Yeah, it is their ultimate symbol of risk-averse compliance.
Because it's too safe.
The commentators argue that the state convinces you that the world is inherently dangerous and that you are fragile. So you put on the helmet, you take the metaphorical pill, and you prioritize absolute safety over vitality.
And the broadcast suggests that true freedom requires accepting risk, embracing danger, and silently rejecting the padded walls of the open asylum.
Precisely.
That paints an incredibly grim picture of our external world. The state as a passive-aggressive nurse, sedating us with safety.
It does. But the commentators don't stop there.
No.
Because Cuckoo's Nest is ultimately about an oppressive system that surrounds you from the outside. The broadcast then pivots to something much more intimate and, frankly, much more disturbing.
What could be more disturbing than a state-run open asylum?
They ask, what if the cage isn't built by the state at all? What if you, or the people who love you, build the cage because reality is simply too traumatic to endure?
Oh, wow. This is a profound shift in their analysis.
It really is. They move from the institutional trap to the ideological bubble. And to do this, they use Wolfgang Becker's 2003 German film, Goodbye Lenin.
The premise of this movie is brilliant.
Have you seen it?
I have. And for you listening, it's set in East Germany, the DDR,
Yeah.
right as the Berlin Wall is about to fall.
Right.
And the mother in the story is a devoted, idealistic socialist. She believes in the Communist Project with every fiber of her being.
It's her entire identity.
Exactly. But one night, she sees the state police brutally beating and arresting her own son at an anti-government protest.
And the psychological shock is just too great.
Yeah, the state she reveres is destroying the child she loves. The cognitive dissonance induces a massive heart attack, and she falls into a coma.
And she stays in that coma for 8 months.
Which is a long time, but especially then, because during those 8 months, history happens.
The Berlin Wall falls.
The DDR completely collapses. Western capitalism, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, it all just floods into East Berlin. The world she dedicated her life to is completely erased.
And when she finally wakes up, the doctor gives her son a terrifying prognosis. Her heart is incredibly weak. Any sudden shock, any major stress will literally kill her.
So the son is faced with an agonizing dilemma. To tell her the truth about the outside world is to basically hand her a death sentence. Her reality must be managed.
So he builds a lie.
He builds an enormous lie. It is an elaborate, all-consuming lie. He and his sister recreate the DDR inside her tiny bedroom.
They hunt down ugly, retro East German furniture.
Yeah. They dig through the trash to find old communist food jars, and they secretly pour modern capitalist jam and pickles into the old packaging.
Which is so funny, but so desperate.
Right. They even get a friend to film fake retro news broadcasts, playing them on a VHS tape to convince her that the socialist paradise is still thriving right outside her window.
It is an act of profound familial love.
It is.
But the broadcast views it through a completely different lens. To understand their critique, we really have to explore the historical concept of nostalgia. Yes. This is a German portmanteau of Ost, meaning east, and nostalgie, meaning nostalgia.
Which honestly feels counterintuitive to a Western perspective.
How so?
Well, we are taught that the fall of the Berlin Wall was a universally euphoric triumph. The evil empire fell, freedom won, and everyone celebrated. Why would anyone be nostalgic for a police state?
Because the historical reality on the ground was deeply traumatic for millions of East Germans. The commentators acknowledged that the DDR was a brutal regime.
Right, but the Stasi, secret informants, zero freedom of expression.
Yes, but they also highlight what the DDR actually provided. Absolute predictability.
Great, so you had a guaranteed job, even if it was menial. You had guaranteed housing.
Exactly. The broadcast even mentions a certain social courtesy or solidarity that existed because everyone was equally repressed.
I guess that makes sense. Misery loves company.
Right. But when the wall came down, that predictable structure evaporated overnight. East Germans were suddenly thrust into the hyper-competitive, chaotic machinery of Western capitalism.
It must have been completely overwhelming.
It was. The Treuhandanstalt, which was the agency tasked with privatizing East German enterprises, liquidated thousands of businesses.
Millions lost their livelihoods.
Yes, their social standing and their entire narrative of who they were. So nostalgia isn't a desire for the Stasi. It is a mourning for a lost, predictable world where you knew exactly where you fit in.
Okay, I understand the history, and this is where the broadcast makes a massive, highly controversial leap, right?
They do. They take this bedroom illusion, this fake DDR built out of love and desperation, and they argue that this is exactly what the modern liberal establishment has done.
Oh boy.
They call it the mainstream woke media bubble.
That's quite a phrase.
Yeah.
So what is their thesis there?
Their thesis is that modern liberal elites have constructed a societal cocoon that functions exactly like that fake bedroom.
Okay, so inside this cocoon, the narrative is perfectly curated to protect the inhabitants from the jarring, complex realities of the actual world.
Exactly. The commentators describe an entire ecosystem of media organizations, academic institutions, and cultural bodies where elites isolate themselves.
Validating one another's worldviews and handing each other awards.
Completely insulated from dissenting thought.
Okay, I have to push back here, or at least play devil's advocate. I understand the mechanics of an echo chamber. But comparing a son protecting his dying mother from a fatal heart attack to a political party creating a media bubble.
It's a stretch.
One is driven by love, the other is driven by what? Malice? Power? How do they justify comparing those two motivations?
Well, the broadcast argues that the motivation of the modern elite is self-preservation, but it's disguised as moral protection.
Interesting.
They believe the establishment views the general public, or at least their own political base, as fragile and incapable of handling raw reality, much like the mother.
So they curate the news so the public doesn't have a metaphorical heart attack.
Wow.
To illustrate this, they point to a very specific, surreal scene in the film, don't they?
They do. It's the Coca-Cola scene.
Right. So the mother's lying in her bed, and she looks out the window, past the fake used Sherman curtains her son put up, and rolling down the side of the building across the street is a massive, bright red Coca-Cola billboard.
The ultimate icon of American capitalism, just invading her socialist bedroom.
It is the sudden, terrifying intrusion of undeniable reality piercing the illusion.
And the son completely panics. He realizes the illusion is cracking.
So what does he do? He scrambles to create a brand new fake news broadcast on the spot, telling his mother that Coca-Cola was actually a socialist invention all along, and the West just stole it.
He bends reality to integrate the billboard into the lie so she doesn't go into cardiac arrest.
And later she wanders outside for a brief moment and sees a helicopter literally airlifting a massive statue of Lenin away into the sky.
The broadcast uses these moments to launch a really blistering critique of modern political discourse. They equate that jarring Coca-Cola billboard to real-world political disruptions.
Like what?
Specifically mentioning things like the rise of right-wing political posters or blunt discussions about remigration.
Okay, so these are harsh realities or dissenting opinions that severely disrupt the established liberal narrative.
According to the commentators, yes.
So according to the broadcast, when a piece of reality that contradicts the narrative enters the woke cocoon, the establishment reacts exactly like the panicked sun.
They scramble to recontextualize it.
They try to control the language, ban the posters, spin a new narrative just to ensure the illusion doesn't shatter.
And that the inhabitants don't realize the world they believe in doesn't exist. That is precisely their argument.
The commentators assert that an entire political class is living in that bedroom, terrified of the outside world.
And this leads to their most explicit political stance. They argue that because of this frantic need to maintain the illusion, we are already living in a post-liberal dictatorship.
Wait, dictatorship? That is an incredibly heavy word to use for media spin. How do they justify comparing Twitter blocking or social media bubbles or biased journalism to actual Stasi oppression? Isn't that a massive leap in logic?
The commentators actually anticipate that critique, and they address it directly by discussing Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban.
Orban? Okay.
The broadcast actually praises Orban.
Wow.
Yes, they praise him for promoting traditional family values and attempting to rebuild a society based on religious and community foundations, essentially offering an alternative to the liberal cocoon.
Which is incredibly polarizing. I mean, Western critics frequently point to Orban as a leader who is systematically dismantling democratic institutions, rewriting constitutions, and crushing a free press in Hungary.
Exactly. And the broadcast brings up a specific author, Roseanne Smits, who apparently argues exactly that figures like Orban are destroying free media and marching toward authoritarianism.
Okay, so they acknowledge the counter-argument.
They do, but the commentators in our source utterly dismiss her. Their counter-argument hinges on the nature of modern censorship.
What do they mean by that?
They argue that the true restriction of freedom isn't happening in Hungary through state decrees. It is happening in the West via woke language policing.
Let me get this straight. They are arguing that being socially ostracized for using the wrong terminology is a worse form of dictatorship than a government shutting down a newspaper.
They view it as a more insidious and pervasive form of control.
Because it's invisible.
Right. A government shutting down a newspaper is an overt act of oppression. You can see it and fight it.
Like the fly in the web.
But social ruin, cancellation, and being forced to adopt a specific ideological vocabulary under the threat of losing your livelihood, that is a psychological dictatorship.
They argue that the real Stasi today are the people policing your tone and your thoughts to maintain the pristine illusion of the bedroom.
They believe the establishment is so terrified of the Coca-Cola billboard of reality that they will silence anyone who points at it.
Okay, let's take a breath, because we are deep in the ideological weeds here.
We really are.
The broadcast has argued that the state traps us with bureaucratic passivity, as seen in Cuckoo's Nest.
Right.
Then they argued that the media and the elites trap us in ideological bubbles to protect us from reality, as seen in Goodbye Lenin.
Yes.
But this raises a fundamental, almost biological question for me.
Which is?
If these traps are so obvious and these bubbles are so fragile, why do we, as individual human beings, so readily fall for them? Why do we choose the trap?
That is the ultimate question. If the cage is locked from the inside, why don't we turn the key?
Right.
And to answer that, the commentators make a sharp pivot.
Where do they go?
They move away from mid-century cinema, away from Cold War history, and plunge straight into theology.
Theology.
They turn to C.S. Lewis's 1945 novella, The Great Divorce.
Now, most people know C.S. Lewis for the Chronicles of Narnia or the Screwtape Letters. But The Great Divorce is this profound allegorical dream vision about the nature of heaven and hell.
And the imagery is haunting.
Yeah, it really is. The narrator finds himself standing in this miserable, sprawling, endless gray town. It's always raining, it's always twilight, and the citizens are just constantly bickering.
They hate each other so much that they keep moving their houses further and further apart.
Until the town is practically empty, but stretches for millions of miles.
Right. And this gray town is the fringes of hell. But the narrative takes a bizarre turn.
A flying red London bus pulls up to the bus stop.
Yes. The narrator gets on, and the bus literally takes a day trip out of the gray town and drops the passengers off in what the broadcast describes as a pre-heaven.
So, to understand why the broadcast uses this book, we really have to dig into the theological shift Lewis is making here. How does his vision of hell differ from the traditional fire and brimstone idea we all have?
The commentators draw a very stark contrast between Lewis and Dante Alighieri's Inferno.
Okay, Dante.
In Dante's medieval worldview, hell is punitive, it's hierarchical, and it's absolute. You are cast into hell by a furious god as punishment for massive operatic sins.
Treason, murder, heresy.
Exactly. And above the gates there is the famous inscription, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." Once you are in, the door is locked from the outside.
But Lewis flips that completely.
He does.
In his gray town, there are no demons torturing you, there are no lakes of fire, and most importantly, there is no abandon all hope sign.
The bus to heaven is free.
The ghosts, the residents of hell, can literally take a vacation to heaven whenever they want.
This fundamentally redefines the concept of damnation. Because if you can leave hell at any time, why is anyone still there?
That's the million-dollar question.
The broadcast emphasizes Lewis's answer. The sins that keep people in hell are not grand betrayals. They are mundane, insidious, everyday flaws.
The broadcast specifically lists them, right? Selfishness, desperate need to be needed, intellectual laziness, petty grievances, arrogance.
Lewis's argument is that if a human soul clings to these small, petty flaws for eternity, those flaws eventually consume the soul, isolating it completely.
So hell isn't a torture chamber you were thrown into.
No, it is a state of being you actively choose by refusing to let go of your own ego. Hell is a door locked from the inside.
And this choice is visualized in the most visceral way when the ghosts actually get off the bus in heaven. Because heaven in this book isn't some ethereal place with clouds and harps.
Not at all. It is hyper-real.
The source leans heavily into this concept of hyper-reality, right?
Yes. In Lewis's vision, heaven is so utterly solid, so objectively, densely real, that the ghosts from the gray town, who are flimsy, transparent, and insubstantial, cannot withstand it.
The physical environment of heaven is agonizing to them. The grass isn't soft. To a ghost, every single blade of grass is as hard and sharp as a diamond.
It pierces their phantom feet when they try to walk.
A single apple on a tree is so dense and heavy that a ghost couldn't even begin to lift it. When a drop of rain falls, it shoots right through their transparent bodies like a bullet.
The environment is objectively beautiful and glorious, but subjectively, to a flimsy creature, it is pure agony.
The only way for the ghost to remain in heaven is to undergo a transformation. They must choose to become solid.
They have to endure the pain of the diamond grass, shed their egos, abandon their petty grievances, and grow into the reality of the place.
They have to literally become better, more substantial people to withstand the glory of truth. It's like if you've been bedridden in a pitch-black room for 5 years.
Right.
Your muscles have atrophied, your eyes are super sensitive. If someone suddenly drags you outside to run a marathon on a bright, sunny day.
The fresh air and the sunlight are objectively healthy, good things.
But to your weakened body, the light is blinding, and the physical exertion feels like you are being ripped apart.
You just want to rush back into the dark room.
Not because the dark room is good for you, but because it is comfortable and it doesn't demand anything of you.
That is a perfect translation of the metaphor. Truth and reality are objectively good, but they demand growth, and growth is agonizing.
And the commentators take this profound theological concept and meticulously map it onto modern political tribalism.
They argue that contemporary political ideologies function precisely like the everyday sins keeping the ghosts in the gray town.
To make this point, the broadcast highlights one of the most famous scenes in The Great Divorce. It's the story of a ghost who gets off the bus in heaven, and he has a little red lizard sitting on his shoulder, just constantly whispering in his ear.
The lizard represents the ghost's specific, cherished sin. In the context of the book, it is generally interpreted as lust, but it can stand for any corrosive habit or ideology we cling to.
And a massive blazing angel approaches the ghost and offers to kill the lizard.
But the ghost panics. He knows the lizard is keeping him flimsy, but he makes every excuse to keep it.
He asks the angel to just put it to sleep, or maybe he can come back and deal with it later. He is terrified of the pain of losing it.
The angel insists that there is no compromise. The lizard must be killed, and the process will be agonizing, but it is the only path to becoming solid.
Finally, with immense reluctance, the man consents.
The angel crushes the lizard.
The man screams in horrific pain, but almost instantly he begins to solidify. He becomes a real substantial man, and the dead lizard transforms into a magnificent stallion that he rides deeper into the mountains of heaven.
It's a beautiful narrative of redemption, but the broadcast's takeaway is incredibly sharp here.
What do they take from this?
They argue that modern people cling to their political ideologies with the exact same desperate self-destructive attachment as that ghost clinging to the lizard.
Oh, wow.
The commentators make a sweeping, deeply critical claim here. They argue that modern activism, and they specifically target climate activism and asylum advocacy, has basically mutated from political debate into a pseudo-religion.
Right. They argued that secular society has a God-shaped hole, and activism has rushed in to fill it.
Exactly. They claim this modern activism has all the architectural trappings of a religion. It has its own high priests, its own strict rituals of guilt, its own demands for behavioral sacrifice.
You must repent for your carbon footprint. You must sacrifice your lifestyle to atone for historical sins.
But the broadcast argues that this pseudo-religion is fundamentally hollow because it offers no verlossing, no true salvation, no grace, and no joy.
It only demands eternal guilt and endless performative penance.
Which leads to their most controversial application of Lewis's theology.
Because in The Great Divorce, Lewis argues that prioritizing earthly activism, putting everyone else's needs before your own out of a sense of false pity, while utterly ignoring your own spiritual health and relationship with God, is actually a heresy.
Right. It is the ego masking itself as altruism.
The source weaponizes this theological argument to launch a foundational attack on modern welfare and asylum logic.
They coin a phrase to describe modern progressive policy, the equality of the clay hut.
The equality of the clay hut. What is the underlying philosophy of that phrase?
The logic they are critiquing is the idea that if there is suffering anywhere in the world, the moral imperative of the West is to absorb it. The commentators argue that modern progressive ideology dictates that if we cannot elevate everyone on Earth to a high standard of living, we must lower our own standard until perfect equality is achieved.
So if everyone in the world must be helped, and resources are demonstrably finite, then the inevitable mathematical outcome is that everyone ends up suffering equally in a metaphorical clay hut.
Precisely. The broadcast argues that this isn't true charity. They say it is a perverse desire to drag everyone down to the lowest common denominator out of a misplaced, ego-driven sense of guilt.
So what is true charity, according to them?
True charity, they argue, is not making people endlessly dependent on your guilt-driven handouts. True charity is fostering personal responsibility.
Telling people that they possess the free will to choose the bus to heaven, to endure the diamond grass, and to become solid themselves, rather than the West trying to build a slightly more comfortable, subsidized gray town for the entire globe.
Exactly. They view the entire framework of modern social justice not as a noble pursuit of equity, but as a collective refusal to do the hard, painful work of personal growth.
And they bring this entirely back down to earth with a brutal metaphor about a real city, don't they?
They do. They compare the gray town of Lewis's hell to the modern Dutch city of Elmere.
It is quite a targeted critique of urban planning and modern living.
But they use Elmere as a symbol for a sterile, manufactured, culturally devoid waiting room. They argue that modern citizens are just standing at a metaphorical bus stop in Elmere, hoping for some spiritual Efteling.
Efteling being a very famous fairy tale-themed amusement park in the Netherlands.
Exactly. They want the thrill, the entertainment, and the warm feelings of salvation, but they want it delivered to them comfortably.
They refuse to endure the agonizing pain of the diamond grass, which represents confronting true reality.
They prefer to hold onto their ideological lizards because it is easier to be a ghost in a gray town than a solid human bearing the weight of reality.
Oh, we have journeyed through an incredibly dense, challenging ideological landscape today.
Oh, we really have.
We've analyzed a broadcast that uses One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest to warn us about a state that controls us not with violence, but with passive-aggressive bureaucratic empathy.
Right.
We explored how they use Goodbye Lenin to argue that our media and elites are building fragile, desperately curated bubbles to protect us from the jarring billboard of reality.
And finally, we unpack their use of the Great Divorce to explain why we so often choose to remain flimsy ghosts in a comfortable hell, clinging to our ideological lizards rather than facing the agonizing, diamond-sharp reality of truth. It is a stark, highly controversial framework, but it demands we scrutinize the institutions we trust, the media we consume, and the ideologies we defend.
It does. And it leaves us with a profound, lingering question drawn straight from C.S. Lewis. And it is a question for you, listening right now.
Something to really think about.
Regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, whether you find this broadcast's worldview illuminating or entirely abhorrent, the metaphor of the spiky grass applies to all of us. I want you to look at your own life. Think about the beliefs you hold most dear, the political tribes you belong to, the narratives you fiercely defend online, the worldview that structures your day.
Ask yourself a hard question.
What if the beliefs that make you feel the most comfortable, the most morally secure, and the most safe are actually the very ghosts keeping you flimsy?
What if the lizard is whispering to you right now?
If you woke up tomorrow and found that true reality was as painful to walk on as diamond grass, would you have the strength to endure the spikes, shed your ego, and become solid? Or would you turn around, get back on the bus, and head straight back to the gray town? Keep questioning the bubbles around you. We'll see you next time.